The single most devastating piece of text message data currently sitting in a federal archive does not come from a cell tower dump or a standard maritime communication log, but from a frantic, desperate digital transmission sent from the middle of the ocean that completely tears apart the timeline of April 4th. For months, the disappearance of 55-year-old Lynette Hooker from the luxury sailboat Soulmate was framed in public forums as a freak nautical tragedy, a bizarre sequence of mechanical failures and bad luck in the shallow, deceptively quiet waters of Aunt Pat's Bay in the Bahamas. But the entire foundation of that accident defense has just been utterly shattered by an explosive, unsealed statement from Lynette's daughter, Carly, who has provided federal investigators with a mountain of hidden communications, prior domestic incident reports, and a terrifyingly specific historical baseline that converts this missing person case into an active federal homicide investigation. The world was told that Lynette simply slipped off an 8-foot dinghy into the black Caribbean water after a rogue wave struck the vessel, taking the ignition keys and the kill switch lanyard down with her into the depths, leaving her 59-year-old husband, Brian Hooker, completely helpless in the dark. Yet Carly's bombshell disclosure reveals that exactly 2 years before this alleged accident occurred, during a brutal, closed-door physical altercation inside their previous residence, Brian allegedly choked Lynette into near unconsciousness and calmly whispered a vow that she would eventually end up at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean, precisely where no forensic team or dive rescue squad could ever find her body. Think about that for a moment, and ask yourself why a detail that's specific shared years before her disappearance matches the exact geographical reality of what happened on April 4th. This changes everything we thought we knew about the dynamic aboard the Soulmate, because it shifts the focus away from a tragic maritime mishap and forces us to look directly at a calculated, long-term pattern of domestic terror that was carefully masked beneath the glossy, sun-drenched exterior of the couple's YouTube channel, The Sailing Hookers. Stay with me, because this is where it gets incredibly complicated, and the timeline established by the Royal Bahamas Police Force begins to show deep, irreconcilable fractures when held up against the digital footprint of the vessel. When Brian Hooker first paddled into Marsh Harbor at 4 o'clock in the morning on April 5th to report his wife missing, he presented the image of a broken, exhausted husband who had spent nearly 8 agonizing hours fighting wind and tide to row a crippled, motorless dinghy ashore after his wife vanished. He claimed the incident happened around 7:30 the previous evening, meaning there was a massive, unexplained 8-hour delay between the moment Lynette supposedly entered the water and the moment local authorities were first notified that a United States citizen was drowning in their jurisdiction. If you were in shallow water, just a short distance from shoreline, where local Bahamian boaters explicitly state an adult could easily stand up or swim to safety, why would your first instinct not be to scream for help, fire a distress flare, or alert the numerous anchored vessels resting less than a quarter-mile away? Instead, according to newly compiled federal telemetry records, Brian's movements during those 8 hours show a deeply unsettling sequence of deliberate, localized positioning rather than the erratic, panic-driven drift of a stranded mariner. Local investigators are now openly questioning whether that lengthy window of total silence was used not to battle the elements, but to ensure that the ocean had completely consumed any physical evidence of a struggle before the rescue teams could ever deploy their sonar equipment. This is where things get serious, and I want to invite you to drop your thoughts in the comments right now as we break down this specific transition, because the contrast between public perception and private reality in this case is staggering. Do you believe an experienced captain navigating familiar, shallow waters could genuinely lose his wife, his motor function, and his ability to signal for help all within a single 3-second window? Or does Carly's revelation of a prior strangulation threat completely reframe those 8 hours of silence for you? Let me know what you think below, because as we look closer at the background of the Soulmate, the financial and psychological dynamics of this marriage reveal an even darker layer of leverage. The 46-foot luxury yacht was not a joint venture. It was fully funded, maintained, and owned by Lynette herself, a dedicated mother and talented canvas artisan who viewed the vessel as her ultimate retirement sanctuary and personal escape. She had spent years handcrafting the custom canvas work for the boat, pouring her life savings into an asset that she believed would grant her freedom. But she had inadvertently isolated herself miles away from civilization, stranded on the open sea with a highly volatile partner whose charming, outgoing public persona completely vanished the moment the camera stopped rolling. Carly's statement describes her stepfather as a master manipulator who used the geographical isolation of the cruising lifestyle as a weapon of control, ensuring that whenever his severe aggression escalated into physical violence, there were no neighbors, no family members, and no law enforcement officers within radius to intervene. The psychological trauma embedded within this family environment became undeniable when federal agents recovered documentation proving that Lynette had actually fled the sailboat during a temporary separation, seeking emergency refuge in Florida to escape Brian's growing rage. It was during this brief period of safety that she detailed the horrific night of strangulation to her daughter, explicitly stating that Brian had pinned her down, cut off her breath, and mapped out her future demise in the ocean. Yet, like so many victims caught in the terrifying, cyclical manipulation of domestic abuse, she was eventually drawn back onto the vessel, persuaded by promises of change and the intense emotional investment she had in her dream boat, effectively sealing her fate within the lonely expanses of the Caribbean. Local mariners who interacted with the couple in the days leading up to the April incident noted that the atmosphere aboard the Soulmate was thick with toxic friction, an instability that spiked dramatically whenever alcohol was introduced into the tight, claustrophobic living quarters of the yacht. When Lynette finally vanished into the black waters of Aunt Pat's Bay, Brian immediately attempted to take control of the narrative, using his social media background to paint a picture of an adoring husband left shattered by a cruel twist of nature, a story that stood in direct, chilling contrast to his physical behavior on the water. This first part of the unfolding investigation exposes only the surface of a deep forensic web that federal prosecutors are currently spinning around Brian Hooker. If you believe this story deserves national attention and that Lynette's family deserves answers, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel and share this video, so we can ensure the details of this case continue to be brought to light as we move into the shocking mid-ocean interception. Following his release from Bahamian custody due to a lack of immediate physical evidence, Brian fled back to Michigan, breaking his public vow to never stop searching for his missing wife, completely unaware that Air Station Miami aviation assets and the Coast Guard Investigative Service were quietly tracking his multi-thousand-dollar asset as it was stealthily sailed toward Florida by a hired captain. The subsequent federal seizure of the Soulmate 40 nautical miles off the coast of Melbourne, its dramatic engine failure at sea, and the yellow crime scene tape that now wraps the vessel at the Fort Pierce station mark the true beginning of a legal battle that is actively leveraging digital telemetry and a mysterious second vessel to finally bring a hidden predator to justice. The forensic raid inside the secured perimeter of the Fort Pierce Coast Guard station quickly became the turning point where science began to directly collide with Brian Hooker's carefully constructed timeline. When special agents with the Coast Guard Investigative Service, accompanied by elite digital forensic technicians, stepped into the primary cabins of the Soulmate, they were not just looking for obvious signs of a physical struggle. They were searching for the microscopic, invisible footprint of a crime. For days, the interior of the 46-foot luxury yacht was systematically deconstructed, with teams scraping the bilge pumps, the woodwork, the outer hulls, and the tight living quarters for any trace of blood splatter or biological material that might have survived the journey across the Gulf Stream. But the most damning evidence pulled from the vessel did not require a chemical enhancement to become visible. It was written in the binary code of the boat's onboard electronic navigation systems. Technicians successfully extracted the historical data from the yacht's primary GPS chart plotters, satellite communication arrays, and personal cellular devices, mapping out the precise movements of both Brian Hooker and the Soulmate down to a single meter. This digital telemetry exposed a devastating anomaly that completely invalidated Brian's claims of a frantic, wind-driven drift across the bay, while he was supposedly stranded in the crippled dinghy. Think about that for a moment, and ask yourself why the electronic footprints suggest a highly localized, deliberate sequence of events that occurred hours before Brian ever made his casual 4 o'clock in the morning report to the local Bahamian authorities. If his wife had truly fallen overboard at 7:30 in the evening, and if he was genuinely trapped in a motorless vessel at the mercy of sudden, violent waves, the navigational data should show a clear, erratic trajectory dictated by the natural currents of Ampats Bay. Instead, the satellite logs paint a picture of calculation, revealing that the dinghy remained in a highly specific, controlled positioning near the shoreline during the exact hours Brian claimed he was desperately battling the elements to save his wife. This changes everything we thought we knew about his alibi, because it indicates that the narrative of a mechanical failure, where the ignition keys supposedly sank with Lynette, was likely an engineered distraction designed to buy him time. As federal technicians continued to comb through the woodwork, rumors began to ripple through the close-knit Michigan and Florida boating communities that advanced forensic light sources had illuminated suspicious, localized cleanup patterns within the master stateroom. It appeared as though someone had desperately attempted to erase physical evidence and wash down the interior surfaces before handing the keys over to a private, hired captain to quietly sail the ghost ship back to the United States. Stay with me, because this is where the investigation takes an even more alarming turn, and the federal government introduces a piece of evidence that Brian Hooker never anticipated. Newly unsealed maritime surveillance log from the night of the disappearance revealed that the Soulmate was not as isolated as Brian believed it to be. Federal agencies issued an urgent international appeal to identify a second, completely undocumented vessel that had been anchored directly alongside the Hooker yacht in the shallow, secluded waters of Ampats Bay on the exact night Lynette vanished. Investigators strongly believe that the occupants of this phantom craft may have been direct eyewitnesses to the fatal encounter, potentially hearing the terrifying echoes of a domestic dispute bouncing across the quiet water, or even witnessing the exact moment Lynette was forced into the Black Ocean. This massive breakthrough completely destroys the defense's narrative of an isolated, tragic accident on the open sea, converting the quiet Bahamian anchorage into a highly active homicide scene. By treating the vessel as a crime scene and matching Brian's historical threats with the cold, unyielding reality of maritime telemetry, federal prosecutors are successfully building a tight, circumstantial wall around the missing woman's husband. This is where things get serious, and I want to invite you to drop your thoughts in the comments right now as we look at this incredible development. Do you think it is possible for someone to completely clean a crime scene on a boat well enough to fool federal agents? Or do you believe the digital data from the GPS is going to be the ultimate smoking gun that secures an indictment? Let me know your theories below, because the psychological toll this legal limbo is taking on Lynette's loved ones has reached an absolute breaking point. Carly and her family are currently forced to sit in agonizing anticipation, waiting for the Department of Justice to officially convert the Coast Guard's extensive forensic findings into a formal federal indictment for murder on the high seas. Prosecuting a homicide without a physical body is an exceptionally difficult hurdle in the American legal system. But the combination of a documented history of domestic strangulation, an intentional 8-hour delay in alerting rescue teams, and highly compromised vessel data makes an eventual arrest feel nearly inevitable to seasoned maritime legal experts. If you believe that no one should be able to use the vast, dark expanses of the ocean to hide a crime, and if you want to support Carly's relentless pursuit of truth for her mother, please take a second to share this video and subscribe to the channel so we can keep the pressure on this developing investigation. The luxury sailboat, which once stood as a beautiful symbol of a mother's hard-earned retirement dream and personal sanctuary, now sits rotting in a government impound lot in Fort Pierce, entirely wrapped in yellow law enforcement tape, a stark, tragic monument to a calculated betrayal. Brian Hooker remains a free man for the moment, hidden away from the aggressive media spotlight in a quiet corner of Michigan, but the legal noose is tightening with every single digital byte pulled from the yacht's hard drives. The relentless, multi-agency pursuit of justice sends a definitive message to the world that the sea will no longer protect a predator from his past. And as we move into the next phase of this unsealed documentation, we will reveal the shocking secret communications Brian sent to family members in the days immediately following his escape from the islands. The unsealed federal search warrants have exposed a series of highly encrypted private communications sent by Brian Hooker during his rapid transit from the Bahamas to Michigan that have completely blindsided the investigation. For weeks, his legal team maintained that his departure from the islands was a medical necessity, driven by the severe knee injury he sustained when he spectacularly plummeted overboard in handcuffs during the mandatory police reenactment in Ampats Bay. They painted the picture of an aging, injured man, broken by grief, who simply needed to return to his home state to seek specialized orthopedic care that was unavailable in the out islands of the Bahamas. But the digital forensic unit of the Coast Guard Investigative Service has thoroughly dismantled this medical narrative by recovering deleted messages from a secondary burner device that Brian allegedly activated immediately after his release from local custody. These messages, sent to a select circle of longtime associates, contain absolutely no mentions of physical pain, medical treatments, or a desire to coordinate search efforts for his missing wife. Instead, the text files reveal a frantic, highly calculated effort to liquidate financial assets, transfer vessel titles, and secure the services of a maritime salvage expert who could expedite the removal of the Soulmate from Bahamian waters before United States federal agents could legally execute a secondary search warrant. Think about that for a moment, and ask yourself why a man who claimed to be completely devastated by the accidental drowning of his lifelong partner would prioritize the rapid, covert movement of a marine asset over the recovery of her physical body. If you are innocent, and if you genuinely believe your wife is lost somewhere in the currents surrounding Marsh Harbor, you do not hire a private, out-of-state captain to quietly sail your main living quarters across international borders under the cover of darkness, while a local community is still actively scanning the shoreline. You stay on the docks, you coordinate with the dive teams, and you offer every single piece of logistical data available to assist the rescue crews. Instead, Carly's unsealed statements show that Brian completely cut off all communication with Lynette's direct blood relatives during this exact window, refusing to answer frantic phone calls from his stepdaughter and ignoring direct inquiries regarding the logistics of the ongoing search. When he did occasionally reply via text, his messages were described as cold, superficial, and entirely focused on protecting his personal legal liability, warning family members not to speak with external media outlets or share historical details regarding their past domestic disputes with local law enforcement. This changes everything we thought we knew about Brian's state of mind following the incident, because it transitions his behavior from that of a traumatized survivor into that of an individual actively managing a major logistical crisis. Stay with me, because this is where the financial breadcrumbs get incredibly complicated and the true motive behind the ownership of the Soulmate begins to take a terrifying shape. Federal financial analysts tracking the couple's banking records have discovered that just 3 weeks prior to the fateful voyage to Ampats Bay, a massive structural alteration was made to the marine insurance policy covering the 46-foot vessel. A secondary rider was attached to the contract, one that specifically outlined substantial payouts and liability protections in the event of an accidental death or catastrophic passenger loss occurring outside of United States territorial waters. This structural change was executed solely by Brian, utilizing a power of attorney agreement that Lynette had signed years earlier during a period of medical vulnerability, a document that Carly explicitly claims was weaponized by her stepfather to slowly strip her mother of her financial independence and legal autonomy over her own retirement sanctuary. This is where things get serious, and I want to invite you to drop your thoughts in the comments right now, because this financial development completely alters the landscape of this case. Do you believe that the sudden, high-value alteration to the marine insurance policy right before a trip to an isolated Bahamian bay is a definitive sign of premeditation? Or could a defense attorney successfully argue that this was just standard logistical preparation for an extended international cruise? Let me know your perspective below, because as we examine the physical layout of the Soulmate, the mechanics of Brian's alibi continue to face aggressive pushback from seasoned maritime engineers. The defense has continually rested on the assertion that when Lynette bounced off the side of the 8-foot dinghy, her body took the emergency kill switch lanyard and the ignition keys straight down into the shallow water, instantly disabling the engine and leaving Brian unable to turn the craft around to rescue her. However, forensic testing conducted by federal investigators on the exact make and model of the dinghy's outboard motor has revealed an entirely different mechanical reality. The emergency kill switch mechanism on that specific marine engine is designed with a secondary bypass feature, a standard safety protocol that allows an operator to instantly restart the motor manually within seconds, even if the physical plastic key has been completely removed or lost overboard. As an experienced captain who spent over a decade navigating the open sea and creating content for a sailing channel, Brian Hooker would have been thoroughly trained in this exact emergency restart procedure. The revelation that he chose to spend nearly 8 hours paddling a completely functional, easily restartable dinghy toward the shoreline, while his wife was allegedly drowning in the shallow waters behind him, is an inconsistency that federal prosecutors are preparing to anchor at the very center of their upcoming criminal presentation. Every single defense claim is being methodically dismantled, not by subjective theories, but by the cold, unyielding laws of marine engineering and digital telemetry, leaving the free man in Michigan with fewer places to hide as the international community demands real accountability for Lynette. The final, missing piece of this sprawling maritime puzzle rests within the unsealed records of the Fort Pierce Coast Guard Station, where federal digital forensic specialists have pulled a series of highly compromising, hidden electronic log from the Soulmate's automated systems. When a modern luxury yacht navigates international waters, it does not just record its geographical coordinates. It logs its internal power distribution, engine temperatures, battery drops, and localized sensor triggers. Technicians examining the physical electrical architecture of the 46-foot vessel discovered that at exactly 8:15 on the night of April 4th, while Brian Hooker claimed he was drifting helplessly in the dark bay, trying to restart a dead dinghy motor, the main generator of the Soulmate experienced a sudden, high-intensity power surge. This specific electrical spike was caused by the manual activation of the vessel's high-capacity deck winches and heavy anchor windlass systems, equipment that requires immense power and can only be operated from the primary control panel inside the main cabin. This hidden digital byte totally destroys Brian's timeline, proving that someone was actively managing the heavy mechanical systems of the primary yacht during the exact window he claimed to be completely isolated and stranded miles away in an open, crippled dinghy. Think about that for a moment, and ask yourself why the mechanical data from the primary ship shows heavy, manual activity at a time when both occupants were supposedly clear of the main hull and navigating the outer bay. If Brian was trapped in a tiny dinghy battling violent waves, who was inside the main cabin of the Soulmate, operating the heavy deck winches and altering the vessel's physical anchoring alignment. This changes everything we thought we knew about the night Lynette vanished, because it strongly suggests that the entire narrative of the dinghy accident was a highly choreographed, artificial scenario created long after the fatal encounter had already occurred aboard the primary vessel. Federal investigators are now working under the terrifying theory that the domestic dispute reached its violent climax inside the master stateroom of the luxury yacht, and that the smaller dinghy was only utilized as a tool to transport and dispose of physical evidence in the deep, outer currents beyond Aunt Pat's Bay. Carly's initial description of her stepfather's calculating, dual personality perfectly aligns with this digital blueprint, exposing a man who possessed the cold, mechanical precision required to stage a complex nautical accident, while his wife's family remained completely oblivious thousands of miles away. Stay with me, because this is where the legal news finally tightens, and the Department of Justice prepares to make a definitive move that will forever alter the status of this active homicide investigation. Federal prosecutors from the Southern District of Florida have quietly convened a grand jury, systematically presenting the Coast Guard's extensive telemetry findings, the suspicious marine insurance policy alterations, and the devastating mechanical analysis of the outboard motor. True crime advocates and seasoned maritime legal experts emphasize that while prosecuting a murder case without a physical body is an exceptionally difficult hurdle, the sheer density of the circumstantial and digital evidence surrounding Brian Hooker makes his eventual arrest an absolute certainty. Carly and her distraught family continue to navigate a deeply painful limbo, unable to properly grieve or host a formal memorial service without a body or a final confession. But they refuse to let Lynette's vibrant legacy be buried in a shallow, anonymous grave. Carly has openly vowed to continue cooperating with federal agents, ensuring that every text message, every historical domestic report, and every chilling threat uttered by her stepfather is fully leveraged to secure absolute justice for her mother. This is where things get serious, and I want to invite you to drop your final thoughts in the comments right now as we close this breaking update. Do you believe the combination of the hidden winch logs and the bypass capability of the dinghy engine is enough to secure a conviction for murder on the high seas? Or will the lack of a physical body allow Brian Hooker to remain a free man in Michigan? Let me know your perspective below, because your voice and your theories help keep this critical case alive in the public consciousness. If you believe that Lynette Hooker deserves justice and that her family's agonizing wait must come to an end, please take a final moment to share this video across your social media platforms and subscribe to the channel so you never miss a breaking update as this federal indictment moves toward execution. The luxury sailboat, once a beautiful symbol of a mother's hard-earned retirement dream and personal sanctuary, now sits rotting in a government impound lot, entirely wrapped in yellow crime scene tape, a stark, unyielding monument to a calculated betrayal. Brian Hooker remains free for the moment, hidden away from the aggressive media spotlight, but the digital footprint he left behind in the quiet waters of the Bahamas ensures that the dark expanses of the ocean will no longer protect him from his past.